Frank Lucas said he owned Harlem. But what most people don't know is that the story Hollywood told you isn't the real one. Because behind the myth, behind the money, there's a much darker truth. Before the money, before the power. Frank Lucas was invisible, a driver, a shadow behind real bosses. He wasn't born into crime. He wasn't connected. He was nobody, just another face in Harlem, working for Bumpy Johnson, the real godfather. Frank carried bags. He drove cars. He watched. And while everyone else was trying to be seen, Frank was learning. No one thought he would ever become a king. And that's exactly what made him dangerous. When Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, Harlem was left with a power vacuum. Everyone wanted control. Italian families, black gangs, Dominicans. Everyone but Frank Lucas didn't fight for territory. He didn't start a war. He changed the entire game. Frank looked at the heroin trade and saw something broken. The Italians controlled the supply. They controlled the price. They controlled everything. So Frank decided to cut them out. Instead of buying from middlemen, he went straight to the source, Southeast Asia. During the Vietnam War, according to multiple accounts, while American soldiers were dying overseas, Frank Lucas was building his supply chain in the Golden Triangle. And according to some testimonies, the drugs were smuggled back using military transport. A system so broken, so corrupt, that it was barely inspected. Whether every detail of that story is true or not, what is true is this. Frank Lucas suddenly had heroin that was purer and cheaper than anyone else's. He called it blue magic, and it flooded Harlem. Money started to flow. Fear followed, and that's when the myth of Frank Lucas was born. He bought buildings, fancy cars, expensive fur coats. He sat front row at the Ollie Frazier fight, wearing a chinchilla coat worth over $100,000. That coat would later draw attention to him. But at the time, it sent a message. Frank wanted to be seen. He wanted respect. People said he controlled Harlem, that he had police on payroll, judges, detectives. He wasn't just a drug dealer. He was untouchable, or so it seemed. Because here's what the movies didn't tell you. A large part of Frank Lucas' story was exaggerated. Some of it may have been completely made up. Even Richie Roberts, the detective who arrested him, later said that Frank inflated his own legend. The empire wasn't as large as he claimed. The power wasn't absolute. The truth is this: Frank Lucas wasn't untouchable. He was protected by a corrupt system, by dirty cops, by officials willing to look the other way. Frank didn't build an empire alone. He exploited a system that was already broken. And when that protection started to crack, so did his empire. In 1975, Frank Lucas was arrested. The attention he drew to himself, including that infamous chinchilla coat, put him directly on the DEA's radar. This time, they couldn't ignore him. He was sentenced to 70 years in prison. 70 years. But the story doesn't end there. To reduce his sentence, Frank Lucas cooperated with authorities. He gave up dozens of corrupt police officers and criminals. And after just 5 years, he walked free. 5 years for an empire built on addiction, destruction, and death. Once again, the system didn't punish him. It protected him. And that's why Frank Lucas' story isn't really about power. It's about what happens when truth finally catches up. About a man who exploited a broken system, and a myth Hollywood turned into a legend. Because the real story, it's darker than any movie. If you want the real stories behind America's hidden empires, subscribe. Because what you think you know is only half the story.